A lot of you dads, a lot of you uncles, you can relate to this. If you've ever taken your little child or nephew or niece or grandchild, in my case, and thrown them up in the air and caught them, right? Daniel says, don't do that. I'll tell you what happened. I saw a new twist on this at the playground this week. I was watching my younger grandchild, and she was on a platform. And next to me were two other dads. And the one dad said to his son, "Jump, John, jump." The kid was just, I think, able to stand and walk. So he didn't have a lot of confidence, and he didn't probably have quite the ability to know how to jump yet. But he looked like he kind of wanted to. And so this very smart dad reached over and grabbed him and said, "That was a great job." Okay? The child had barely moved into it. But what the dad wanted to communicate to his little boy was the fact that Daddy's here and you're safe. And so you can take the risk, the jump of faith, you know. And so this is something, like I said, we often like to do. The kids, we throw them up in the air, we have them jump, and they get that little child-sized adrenaline rush. You know, they feel the thrill. But because you're there and they know you will catch them, the edge of fear is missing, and only the thrill remains. In today's passage, we're going to come to this most pivotal story about Jacob in his walk with God. And God's going to come to him, and he's going to kind of do the same thing with Jacob. He's going to grab this patriarch to help him to feel safe when he's facing fearful things in his life. And at the end, Jacob's going to walk away, and he's going to find himself limping, but only physically, because he's going to find that in his soul and in his spirit, he is walking stronger than ever before. And that's what we're talking about today, to walk strong. And to walk strong for Christians is to go through life with a strong faith in God. To be able to move forward with faith as our solution, faith our answer, faith our resource for handling whatever life throws at us and whatever scares us in life. Some of you old-timers remember a song called "Faith is the Victory"? How many of you remember that? Only two of us. Okay. Anyway, it's taken from 1 John 5:4, and you don't need to turn to it. I'm going to just read it to you real quick. But it's talking about how powerful faith is. And it goes like this. For everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world. Well, that sounds pretty audacious, huh? Overcomes the world. And this is our victory that has overcome the world. Long dash, our faith. It is through faith that we can walk strong, and we will overcome anything that God allows to come into our life, because God is there. And when he says, you got a situation where you've got to jump, you don't have to be afraid. Because Jesus says, you know, Romans 8, we are more than conquerors through Christ's work in us. Jesus said before he went away, before they were to go through the most difficult time of their apostleship, he says to them in John 16, in this world you're going to experience tribulation. You guys ever been through tribulation? Yeah, we have. We all have. And we wish it was a one-time thing, but it keeps coming back. But he says, don't fear. You will have tribulation, but I have overcome. And therefore I will help you to overcome. John 16:33. And so, here it is. We got Jacob. And it's said in the Bible on more than one occasion what a fearful, timid guy he is. He is strong as an ox, but in his heart, he is timid. He is fearful. In John 31:31, when Laban catches up to him during his great escape from Haran on his way back to Canaan, Laban says, why did you run? Why did you sneak away with like this? And Jacob says, I was afraid. And then now, in Genesis 32:11, in the middle of his prayer to God, on the eve of his meeting with his brother who had blood in his eyes, saying, I'm going to kill you, he was terrified. Even more afraid than he was with Laban. And of course, in that prayer, right in the heart, in the middle of that, he says to God, I'm scared. I am afraid. And so this fearfulness has been a part of his life. It has been a persistent thing that has dogged him from the beginning. It seems to be a part of his personality, a part of his character. You know, part of it was valid because it was societal, it was social. Back then, if you were not firstborn, your life could be insignificant because you would get half of what your number one brother got. And that often meant poverty. Today, we don't have that rule, right? We don't operate by the firstborn gets 2/3 of everything or he gets a double portion. But you know what? Some of you might have been a middle child. You weren't born first, you weren't born last. You can suffer from the same thing. You were the neglected child because your parents paid attention to the first one, right? And then paid attention to the last one. And so you grow up feeling insignificant, forgotten, overlooked. And so we have that same kind of thing. And this might have been what was driving him to always be grasping, always be grabbing, always feeling like he needed more. You know, this fear might have been his hot button. And life seemed to constantly push his hot button so that he was always reacting by grabbing, by taking, doing these things because it was making him crazy with fear. You would think getting the initial birthright from his brother was enough, but because the fear constantly gnaws inside, what should have been enough wasn't enough. So he had to next go and steal the blessing from his brother. And so it was never enough, and it just keeps driving him, even to the point where all the pain he was causing, all the destruction of his family, and yet he continues to try to grasp, to reach out in his neediness, to try to take from those who were closest to him. And really, what he needed was to trust God. Because if God had told him that he was going to bless him, he should have just waited and let God bring to him in the way and in the time and in the manner that God would do that ultimately. Well, you know, we too have these kind of fears, these kind of needs, these personality quirks that cause us to struggle in life. And while we may not always react to fear, it may be other things. But you know, for a lot of us, fear is a hot button. Fear in many, many different ways. Last Friday, I was in my office waiting for an appointment. And I heard a child crying really loud outside. And we had an incident last week where there was some crying and it became an issue. So I wanted to come out and make sure that this wasn't an issue again. So I come out, and you know what I saw? I saw a little boy and his mother. And this was not crying like he needed to cry. This was crying to control mom, right? This is the kind of crying you can turn on and turn off, or you can increase the volume, or you can lower the volume. And I came out and I saw him, and I knew exactly what he was doing. And so involuntarily I smiled. I shouldn't have smiled. You don't want to encourage that kind of thing. But I smiled. And he looked at me and he saw my smile and he immediately stopped because he knew that I knew. Okay. Anyway, but this child, already so young, knew his mom's hot button. She was afraid to be embarrassed in public with a child that she could not control. And so he was using his crying to control her. And we find that in our lives. We have our hot buttons. They're easy to surface, and then they become ways in which we become controlled. And like I said, it could be the fear of insignificance if you're a middle child, the one who was neglected and was in between the first. For other people, there's other kinds of fear. A lot of people are afraid of failure. I've got a close friend, and that's his great fear. In spite of success upon success, yet he still lives with a fear of failure. Vice president of an international company, in charge of operations for all of the United States. And yet he's afraid of failure. And he's hurt his marriage so much. Other people fear even of the loss of control. That's kind of one step before fear of failure, right? I can't even let it get out of control, because if I let it even start to get out of control, failure is just what? Around the corner. And so a lot of people have that fear of loss of control. How about the fear of rejection? A lot of our teens. That's a great, great fear. Some of these things depends on our age, our position in life, whatever we're going through, whatever stage. There's another type of fear of loneliness. I didn't know I had a fear of loneliness. But one day when I was with my youth worker, he says, "Ken, what are you afraid of most?" And he asked that question out of the blue, and out popped the word loneliness. I'm afraid of being alone. And I didn't even understand it when I was a preteen answering his question. But now I look back, and because I grew up alone, I was left alone by my parents at a very early age. I grew up without any siblings. And so before I knew it, this fear of loneliness was already a part of my life and could control me, could become a hot button. How about the fear of inadequacy? I don't feel that I can be good enough. And that can be a problem when you don't have faith in yourself. And so personal fears abound in our lives. But then there are other hot buttons that are not about fear. It could be anger. For my dad, that was his problem. That was his hot button. Other people, more and more I run into, a lack of self-discipline. A lack of self-discipline, and even though they are gifted, even though they are talented, it's all going to go to waste because they just can't discipline themselves and organize themselves. Another hot button is the need to live up to high expectations. Sometimes you're driven and you have to overachieve because of high expectations. But then you can react the other way. You can what? Rebel against those high expectations, right? And decide, I'm not going to go to college. Or I'm going to go to college and I'm going to flunk. Then I can say, I tried. You know? And so you can have the same hot button, but you can have a variety of responses. And so that's kind of what's going on when we look into Jacob's life. That he had this hot button, and he needed to grow in faith and to be able to walk strong, have a quality faith that is a working faith, instead of an itty-bitty faith. Back in Matthew 6, he said, Jesus, in talking about worrying about what we're going to eat and what we're going to wear, and he says, look at the flowers, look at the birds. Look how God takes care of them. And he said, oh, ye of little faith. Now, my name is what? My last name. Yee. Well, you know, it's an unfortunate last name in that in the United States, they're always filing my records under a different last name. That sounds like Yee. Which one? Lee. Okay? So whenever they can't find my stuff, I say, look under Lee. Okay? So after a while, you know, because people, even though I would say Yee, and they would hear Lee, if it was in church, you know what I'd say? You know, my last name is Yee, but don't confuse me with my cousin. What cousin? My cousin who has little faith. Yee of little faith. I'm the one with a lot of faith. Okay? You know, 2 chapters later, Jesus says, again, ye of little faith. And you know what he was doing? He was saying this not to the whole group, but he was saying this to his apostles. Because they had found themselves in a storm. And they got terrified. Rightfully. But Jesus says, you shouldn't be terrified. So on the one hand, you got the simple anxiety. Sorry, I left my microphone. On the one hand, you got the simple anxieties of daily life, providing food and shelter and clothing. On the other hand, there are the very real terrors of life that come on you suddenly and that are life-threatening. But Jesus says, your problem is little faith. And so he wants us to come to the point where we're going to have that kind of faith. Well, you know, when life says jump, guess what? You know that you're safe, that God is watching, and you can go through the experience, and there might be some fear, but if your confidence in God is great enough, instead of being that sharp cutting fear, that paralyzing thing, the thing that makes you crazy, you will move through it and just experience the thrill. When my kids were young, I felt it was my duty as a dad to introduce them to roller coasters. Okay? Yeah, roller coasters are a lot of fun. And part of it is the false fear, the thrill of the experience, right? But along the way, they get used to these feelings and they become strong. And they're not afraid of these things that feel a little wild and a little out of control. And so because Jacob had been going through this, God comes to him and teaches him a very important lesson. Instead of lecturing to him, instead of giving him promises, instead of appearing to him, in another dream, God comes to him in a message specially suited to Jacob. And let's read about it in Genesis 32, starting at verse 24. I'm just going to read it. You follow along. Genesis 32, 24 to 31. It says this, and Jacob was left alone, And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. And when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, this man, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. And so Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." And the sun arose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Like I said, God had been giving Jacob lesson after lesson to make him a man of faith. From before he was birthed, there was a promise of his success. And along the way, when he was running in fear, God showed him a vision of angels to calm him, to reassure him, as an indication that no matter where he was, God's presence will be with him. Well, guess what? In chapter 32, as he has left Laban after that encounter, and he's waiting and expecting to meet Esau next, he saw 2 camps of angels right in those opening verses. So God comes to him again and says, "Look, you remember last time, my reassurances, my promise, my help. Angels, remember?" He doesn't remember. He notes it, but it doesn't strengthen him. And so he's going forward, and he's working up all these schemes to try to pacify his brother. And the word that the Bible uses is he tries to appease his brother. Okay? And so this is Jacob at his worst, but at his most typical. Jacob, who is trying to manipulate by giving him these gifts. Instead of bringing gifts as an offering. You ever have somebody come visit you and they bring a gift, and if they hope to stay a long time, they bring you a better gift? You know, it feels a little manipulating, right? And so he's setting all of this stuff ahead of time to try to appease him, instead of coming as the long-lost brother and so happy for the family reunion. But because of his fear, he's not able to do otherwise. And so God has given him promises before birth, promises on going to Laban's household. He's given him 20 years of evidence by blessing him materially, blessing him in a family, giving him, up to now, 11 boys. You know, in those days, you were a rich man. And so he's got plenty of reason to trust God. But for some reason, his fear is so strong, so crippling, that he's still unable to go forward in faith. And so God comes to him. God initiates this event. And Jacob, he must have thought, maybe this is somebody sent by my brother to come and assassinate me, whatever. And so he's fearful. But this man comes to him and wrestles him and holds on, and they continue to fight through the night. And later on, God will ask him, "Hey, what's your name?" And he's going to say, "Jacob." See, the name Jacob is all negative in association. Jacob heel grabber. Sounds like grasping. Sounds like contending. And so God is coming and saying, Jacob, this is your life. You've been wrestling out of your fear. Instead of trusting me, and this is where it's gotten you. You're still afraid. Regardless of all the blessings, you still can't move forward past this problem. And God says, you fear man, but it's me you should be afraid of. And so finally, he gets to the point where God, holding back on his strength, brings it to an impasse. He says, okay, the match is over. Jacob can't let go. He's so stuck. You ever hold on to something where, you held on so hard and so long that you couldn't let go, you couldn't open your hand? It was so funny. After I ran my first marathon, I had been pumping and striding for so long that when I tried to stop, my legs kind of involuntarily shot out from under me. And that's kind of what can happen to us. And so he is always going to reflexively try to wrestle with people because of his fear. And God says in Romans 8:31, if God is for us, who is against us? But he cannot take that. And so God has shown him his quality of life, the constant wrestling, and reminding him of the pain he has caused. And now, when this person so easily dislocates his thigh from his hip bone, he realizes it's God. And so as an inferior to a superior, he says, bless me. I won't let you go until you bless me. And that's when God says, well, tell me your name. And he's reminded that Jacob is not only who he is, but Jacob is what he is. The wrestler, the contender, the fearful. And he says, I'm going to bless you with a new name. Don't worry about wrestling with man. Just wrestle with me. Grow in faith. Look to me. Ask me. Seek me. And I will come and help you. I will be your answer to life. And so he changed it to Israel. Up to now, Jacob is just like the guy that's described in James chapter 1, the double-minded man who is unstable in all his ways. So one moment, Jacob is praying to God, but the next moment, he's sending these bribes to his brother, and he can't decide which way to go. And it's been that way, and so now God finally comes and helps him to become free. So he needs to stop wrestling and to start trusting, to stop fearing, and to know that God will help him. So he can walk by faith and he can keep his eyes on the Lord. Yesterday was my second granddaughter's 1-year-old party. Now, those of you know a little about Korean culture, because my son-in-law is Korean. 1 year is a big deal, right? And they have this little ceremony where they put the child down and the child crawls forward and selects from 4 or 5 different things. This is his big destiny choosing, right? So on the one hand, there is a kung fu belt, athletics. Next to it, there was a stethoscope, medicine. Okay? Then there was a book. He's going to be a scholar. Then my son-in-law put down a $20 bill. He's going to be rich. He's going to go to business and finance. And there was one other thing. 100 eyes, pairs of eyes are upon this poor little kid. And this kid's got to perform. And I can see she's getting a little overcome by this whole event. And everybody's waiting and cheering and all that stuff. And she's my granddaughter. I got to protect her. So I walked around behind, and even if they took my picture, I didn't care. I came to in front of her. And I tried to put myself where she could see me. Because I'm Baba. And maybe she will be calmed. I didn't care which one she picked. I just wanted her calmed so that she would do whatever. I wanted to feel her horizon so that she doesn't see those other 99 pairs of eyes, but to just see my friendly, supportive face. To see the grandpa who took her to the slide and had her come down while holding her fingers so that she can make it down safely, and then taught her how to climb backwards up when it was safe. And she would associate that it might be scary, but Grandpa is here. And so it's going to be a thrill and not a fright. And so God comes to Jacob the same way. That life will bring you these situations, small and terrifying. And it will evoke those fears. And these fears are just one type of hot button. But if we have faith, we can walk strong. And even if life causes us to walk away with a physical limp, we will be strong from the core, in our soul and our spirit. And we will move forward in life, and we won't need to manipulate or run or do other crazy stunts in order to get by. That's what we need to do. We need to learn to trust God fully. And that's a hard thing to do. A lot of people come to God, and all they do is trust Him for one thing: keep me out of hell, right? We want to be saved. But we can't trust Him for our lives now. And that's the rub. I don't want to just have a good forever. I want to have a good now. Don't you? Sure. That's what's going to give us the strength to be strong and successful and be able to help others. And so God wants us, just as much as He wanted Jacob, to have a strong faith, a full faith, a complete faith, a working faith. And so He comes to us and He gives us these challenges and these opportunities to express and to show faith. And we call that not just trusting God for salvation, but trusting God with our lives. We often call that dedication. That every part of my life, my time, my money, my talent, my work, my school, my friendships, my entertainment, everything gets dedicated to God. And as we grow older and as our world enlarges, as our horizon gets bigger, as our lives get more complex and there's more stuff, there's new stuff to dedicate. And we're always having to find new things to turn over to God. Some of us need to be willing to trust Him with more of our time, serving Him. Some of us need to trust Him by giving Him more of what we own, our money. Some of us need to trust God, trust Him with our talents, to use it for Him. Some of us need to trust Him with our fears and let Him make us brave. And we need to have that courage to make commitments, to follow through, or to take scary commitments. Whatever it is, this is a chance to dedicate, to give God 100% of us, not just salvation, but to let Him be our Lord as well as our Savior. And so, it's so appropriate today as we come to the communion, to the Lord's table, which represents Jesus giving all of him to us, that we think about giving all of us to him. And you know, God has been wrestling with you. What is it that you've been unwilling to give? What is it that you have given and then you took back, kind of like a Jacob? He's been already wrestling. And he gives you another opportunity this morning to open up your hand and saying, here, Lord. Just like the song we sang, even if the whole world was ours, it would be too small of a present to give to God. And so it could be some relationship that God doesn't want you to be in. It could be some direction for the future that's going to be wrong for you. And God has been telling you it's the wrong direction. It could be anything. But if God has been speaking to you about it, take this morning and use it as your opportunity to say, Lord, here is more of me. Here is something I have never given. Here is something I need to give back. Let's pray. Father, I just pray for our people that they will not allow the hot buttons of their lives to rule and to cause them pain. Help them to look forward instead to walking in a strong faith with you, so that you may bless, that they may know the thrill and the adventure of walking with you. Now I'm going to just give you a moment to pray. And if you've never dedicated your life to God, you might just pray, Lord, I'm yours completely. All that I have, all that I am. Others, you may want to be more particular. If there's something that you've held back, children, relationships, things you own, your hopes and dreams, whatever. As you do that, I'm going to ask our communion helpers to come forward.